On keeping seniors housed, eviction prevention strategies. My name is Christine, and I'm one of the conference organizers, and I'll be your moderator for the session today. I'm very, very pleased to introduce our speakers from the Office of the Commissioner of Housing Equity in Toronto. Cynthia Summers, she is the Commissioner of the OCH at Toronto Community Housing. Melanie Martin, who is a Senior Advisor at the OCH. And Alan Dudden, who is a senior tenant and leader in Toronto Community Housing, which is one of the social housing landlords in Toronto. So for today's session, Cynthia, Melanie, and Alan have prepared a presentation to talk to you about the 10-step OCH approach, which is a case management approach that they take to help senior tenants manage their rental arrears. And following their presentation, we'll have an opportunity to work through a case study that they have prepared. A copy of the case study and an overview of the 10-step approach are linked at the bottom of the room that we're in right now. And Christian has sent a download link in the chat box where you can access them there. So you'll need to download both the case study, and there's also a handout of the 10-step OCH approach. As you're listening to the presentation, if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the Q&A box. We'll have some time for questions and answers at the end of the session. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Cynthia, Melanie, and Alan for their presentation.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm going to let Mel start.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. We're so excited to be here today to go through and talk to you about what the OCH does and how we work with Toronto Community Housing. So thank you for the introduction. Can we go to the next slide? Okay, perfect. So we'll start off with a brief history of what the OCH does. So the OCH officially opened in April 2014. We were created in response to a tragedy involving a senior tenant. I'm actually not going to go into the details of this case because Alan is going to go through it later on in the presentation. However, that being said, the OCH was created as an office of last resort to assist senior and vulnerable tenants who are facing eviction for arrears. The mandate of the OCH is eviction prevention, and we work exclusively with senior tenants who at TCHC is categorized as 59 plus and the most vulnerable tenants living in Toronto housing. The OCH was set up as an arm's length accountability office where we do not report directly to the TCHC CEO, but rather to the board of directors. We were set up in this way to ensure that we were able to make independent decisions when working with tenants and to also ensure that we were able to make decisions independently and not be swayed by the landlord. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah. So how does the OCH help? So we have 3 roles that we play. So the first is auditing and oversight. So we provide this to TCHC in that before Toronto Housing can proceed to evict a senior or vulnerable tenant, they have an internal arrears collection process that they need to follow. And we actually audit that process to make sure that they've complied with everything. For each of the cases we audit, we provide a report back to TCHC and to the tenant, and we include recommendations for improvement in the future. The second role of OCH is that we provide case management to all tenants referred to us, and we try to work with them to reach a resolution for arrears. We have 45 business days to do this, and during that time, we develop a plan to avoid eviction. To do this, our staff use a unique approach, which is called the OCH approach, which Cynthia will go into more detail later on in the presentation. The third, the OCH engages in advocacy and collaboration, which we recognize is the key to our success. We regularly meet with external stakeholders to ensure that our staff are aware of the resources available to help tenants and work very hard to develop collaborative relationships. Next slide, please. So I'm proud to say that OCH has been achieving results with tenants since 2014. Since opening, we've worked with a total of 1,826 senior households at risk of eviction. And of these, 92% have chosen to work with us, which we're really proud of, because when clients are referred to us, we're told they're the most difficult and they're not willing to address the arrears, and we're actually able to get them to actually work with us in 92% of the cases. And also the stat we're really proud of is that of the households referred to us, we were actually able to avoid eviction in 85% of those cases where tenants didn't have to go to the landlord-tenant board or face eviction. Next slide, please. So I'm going to now pass it over to Alan, who's going to provide some insight into the impact that the OACH has had at TCHC. We're lucky in that Alan has lived in TCHC since before the OACH was created, and as well as afterwards. So he's able to provide an overview of what life looked like before and after the creation of OACH at TCHC. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Alan.
Thank you, Melanie. TCHC seniors were with and had no one to turn to for help. Hundreds of seniors were evicted, and these were some very dark days. It was an 82 who failed to submit his annual review paperwork. His subsidy was revoked, he was charged market rent, and his arrears escalated very quickly. Al came home one day to find that his locks were changed. With nowhere to go, he slept in a staircase in his building. Eventually, he was referred to a nearby shelter. Shortly after he moved into the shelter, virus ended up in the hospital and died. This incident was picked up by major media outlets. People were outraged that this could happen to a vulnerable senior. TCHC, Toronto Community Housing, hired the Honorable Patrick Lesage. He's a former Supreme Court judge, to review the processes and policies. Upon completion of his review, recommendations, a Commissioner of Housing Equity. An executive advisory committee was established with social housing experts from around the city, and I had the privilege of being appointed to this committee and subsequently to the to recruit the Commissioner of Housing. OACH in place, which is the Office of the Community Housing and Senior Living in Toronto Community Housing. Beyond referred to for resolution. OACH does continue. OACH staff go above and beyond issues that lead to necessary supports and tailor affordable repayment plans, ensuring safeguard against senior tenants can now access OACH and their resources and their tenancies. Right.
Hi. So what you see before you is what we call the OACH approach. When the office was created, when on our first day, on my first day of work, there weren't even desks or paper in the office. The vision of the Office of the Commissioner of Housing was a vision created by the Toronto Ombudsman, the Honorable Patrick Lesage, an external community, a committee of about 25 people, the TCH executive, and the TCH board of directors. And the vision was a clear one. It was simply preventing evictions, period. Very simple mandate. But it was left to the OACH to figure out how to deliver that outcome. And I can be honest with you, when we started, I expected some pushback, and I expected a lot of pushback from tenants who might not trust me, might not trust the office, might think that we were just going to be a rubber stamp for evictions. There was all sorts of discussion around what will this OCH be and what's this commissioner going to do. So we started our work. We literally put pages and pages on the wall and tried to develop all of our policies and processes and started building relationships with internal and external stakeholders, and in particular, the tenants that we were going to serve. We started to notice that the tenants who I thought would be reluctant to trust us or work with us were actually willing to work with us. And at about 3 to 4 quarters in, so maybe near the end of the first year, we noticed that the engagement rate was over the top. We were over 90% of the tenants were willing to work with us. And in fact, like Melanie alluded to earlier, they'd been described to us as the most very vulnerable seniors living in Toronto housing, and people that were not trusting of staff and not wanting to share, their personal information, which is the underlying reasons for the arrears. So we sat down as a team and we thought, why does this work? Since 2014, 92% of the tenants have chosen to work with us. 85% of the evictions have been avoided. And I'm not a stats person, but I can tell you that of those people that the eviction was avoided, 70% of them never had a problem again, as far as we're aware. And we find out about people who have difficulty sticking to arrangements we've set up. So I feel pretty confident that it's working. And we said, what is it? It's a miracle. It's working. Every time a tenancy was sustained and an eviction avoided, we cheered at our table. So we sat down at one point and said, why does this work? And that's where we came up with the OCH approach. So it's almost the backwards way to creating an approach, because we said, what are we doing that's creating a successful outcome for our tenants? And you can see the 10 prongs we talk about. These are the things that we will look at working with every single tenant and using these as tools. I've highlighted in red the 3 that we think makes the biggest impact. So number 1, when we approach tenants, often they're very frightened. They've gotten a lot of legal notices. They're confused. Some people think they're paying the rent and they haven't been. Turning 65 and the challenges of their funding changing and their rent changing, and loss of subsidies. These are all issues that Alan's actually going to talk a little bit about after I finish speaking. So the first thing we do is we want to send a positive messaging. We contact them, and the early resolution officers are very skilled at very quickly earning trust, not gaining trust, earning it. And the messaging is that we just want to help you. We understand you've gotten behind in your rent. We want to help you maintain your tenancy. We're independent of the landlord, so feel free to be open and honest with us. The other thing that we do, and it's quite strategic, is that we engage and empower tenants. Those aren't just words. For example, in empowering tenants, it starts with us telling them, you don't have to work with us. This is voluntary, and you can opt out at any point in the process if you wish to do so. And by the way, we'll meet you anywhere. If you want to meet with us in our office, we're welcoming you to our office. If you want us to come to your home, we'll come to your home. If you want to meet in the middle of University Avenue in Toronto, in the middle of winter, at a frozen or turned off water fountain, we'll do that. And in fact, we've done that. We've attended with tenants who are incarcerated. We've worked with a woman who was in a mental health ward and wanted us to assist her to assure that when she came out of the hospital, she had housing. So it's up to the tenant. We'll go wherever. And the same goes for timing. If someone is a single parent or has a job that takes them, they're not available during Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, we'll meet with people anytime that they wish. It's not unusual for us to meet with someone at 6 o'clock at night because that suits their schedule. The other red box is use creative and flexible plans. I've worked a long time, maybe a long time in the public sector. And often there's a lot of rules and a lot of check boxes that need to be filled out in order to do people's work. So when we created OACH, as a team, we decided we were not going to have a checkbox anywhere. And I'm proud to say we have no checkboxes. And what that means is when the early resolution officers are working with the tenant, they can come up with unique solutions, just as unique as the person they're working with. So these solutions are tailored to the tenant. The tenant has been involved in addressing the underlying issues, and the tenant has agreed to any repayment plans or any wraparound supports that we've set up for them. And so I think it's not a coincidence that generally this approach works, because it's actually the seniors we're working with who are creating the plans with our support and our brokering agreements between the landlord, Toronto Community Housing, and the tenant. I want to end this slide with talking about something Linda talked about, which is passion. She struck a very positive vibe with me when she said that, because we often look at each other around the boardroom table and now the virtual table and say, aren't we lucky to feel so passionate about our work? Everyone at the Office of the Commissioner comes to work and says, this is a fulfilling role because I have the power myself to work with the tenants who are also empowered to come up with long-term positive solutions. I applaud Linda for her comment about passion. And I also applaud Arlene for her comments about having creative initiatives. And she described quite a few that I look forward to following up on. If we could go to the next slide, please. The core of the OACH approach is that it's a relational model. It's based on building strong, trustworthy relationships. And it's a community of relationships. So, of course, I've described a little bit about how we strive to earn trust and engage tenants. If we make a mistake, we tell tenants. If we are unable to meet a requirement that they are asking us about, we ensure that we connect them to someone else who can, but we're always striving to be honest and supportive. But I spoke about this in the last slide a bit. It's also about empowering the people who actually do the frontline work, empowering the early resolution officers to have their own way, their own unique ways of working with tenants while embodying the values of OACH. Trusting them to be able to figure out the resources that are required or know where to look for those resources. And trusting them to make recommendations, because after we work with a client, I make a recommendation to Toronto Community Housing as to whether or not the eviction should proceed or not. Because many of the tenants who come to us at what seems like the very last minute, where they're about to be evicted, because TCH has strived to work with the tenants. So I look to the early resolution officers to make recommendations to me. The other part of our relational model is our relationship with stakeholders. When OACH was created, there was some pushback from some of the local legal clinics in Toronto. We took a lot of time to build strong relationships with the legal clinics. In fact, it's one of the very first things we did when the office was opened. We work closely with other stakeholders who support the work of supporting seniors. And we ensure that not only do we have good relationships so they can help our clients, but we make ourselves available to help them or to provide information or to support their clients. So we work very closely with the City of Toronto and many stakeholders across the board in Toronto. We also deal occasionally with the Ontario government and, of course, elected officials. Last but not least, a very interesting part of my work is the relationship we've developed with Toronto Community Housing and how now we work together as a team, even though we're two different stakeholders. For example, we've been actively involved with Toronto Community Housing in developing their new arrears collection process. This is because they're saying, OACH has expertise in working with tenants. Let's work together to make a better arrears collection process. We're also supporting them in their rapid housing initiative, their tenant resolutions office, which is an office that works with the most vulnerable tenants living in Toronto housing, and often it's tenants that have been housed as a result of the rapid housing initiative. We provide the wraparound supports, and we provide a lot of training to Toronto community housing, and the outcome is more sustainable housing for all the tenants, but in particular the seniors who have honored us by trusting us and working with us. The next slide is going to be back, it's going to be back to Alan. He's going to talk to you about the top reasons why tenants are referred to the Office of the Commissioner. What are the top underlying issues that we're trying to resolve with tenants? And although there's, I think you'll see, we did a word cloud, you'll see there's about 12 of them. Alan's going to focus, I think, on the top 3. So next slide, please. Thank you.
I've turned my camera off to ensure that people can hear me better through this Wi-Fi. Let's see what happens. If you need me to turn my camera on, please say yes. You can see in this slide the top underlying issues showing the reasons that people get into arrears and are referred to OACH. Focus on the top.
However, reality is most people have more than one underlying issue, and they're very often chaotic and complex,
Just like the word cloud, which is a good visual on the confusion of tenants that they feel with underlying issue is mental health. Good mental health might look different from one person to another, but there are 6 common factors of well-being that we see across different descriptions and definitions from and around the world. Good mental health includes strong connection,
having a good sense of self,
coping with stress, and
enjoying life.
So the next time you think of mental health, think resilience, confidence, and connection. Not surviving, but thriving. That's what it's all about. The second underlying issue is loss of subsidy, which can be caused from a multitude of issues, including language issues. Toronto Community Housing has 260 dialects, and this is quite a challenge for any tenant coordinator. Even though TCHC has interpreter services for the printed form, interpreters for the verbal communication are not necessarily in any given dialect. Mental health is another large area of loss of subsidy, and this can also include physical health, income change, unexpected expenses, and even death in the family. Anxiety, mood disorder, psychosis, and OCD, stress response syndrome, to dissociation and bipolar. Any one of these items can contribute to loss of subsidy. The third underlying issue is physical health, which can also impede someone from going to the bank if they do not have pre-authorized. Physical can also include mobility issues, sight, and even hearing. Next slide.
Hi there. Thank you, Alan. So when we talk about, the rate of avoidance of eviction, I just want to highlight it hasn't gone down even during COVID. So in 2020, 83% of the tenants who chose to work with us avoided proceeding to the Landlord-Tenant Board. Now, I realize that we're in a moratorium and they wouldn't have been evicted, but in fact, I applaud the frontline staff, the early resolution officers, because they're able to still communicate to the tenants that it's in their own best interest to deal with the underlying issues before any moratorium is removed. What we thought might be interesting is to give you the opportunity to take a look at a real case scenario of a gentleman that we have the honor of working with. So if you haven't already, if you could download the 2 documents, what you'll find is a case study with a few questions to ponder, and you'll also see the OCH approach. And knowing that we don't apply every single prong of the OCH approach unless every single prong is needed, I thought it might be fun at your table to just have a short discussion about what you would do. The questions that you're going to be thinking about, as you'll see, they'll be on the document, are how would you get the tenant to engage with you? And what steps of the OCH approach might have helped with that? Can you identify any challenges you may face working with this particular tenant? And what types of supports would you connect the tenant to? And how would you decrease the arrears? One thing I should note is that when we're working with a tenant, obviously sort of the presenting issue is the arrears and the imminent potential eviction. But part of the OCH approach is that's one of the last things we address when we're working with tenants, because we believe that most people do want to pay their rent. So the real issue is identifying the underlying issues and creatively thinking about how can we provide options to the tenant, and of course options that the tenant's prepared to engage in. So we're going to break you out into breakout rooms. This is exciting. We're relying on the IT guy who's been amazing. And we're going to let you read the case scenario and then take 12 minutes, and then we'll pull you back in the main room and we can talk about what actually happened in this case and gather some of your ideas. So with that, Kristen, if you're able to put everyone in tables to discuss this,